The world vanished. One moment, the forest floor. The next, the hard grate of bark against my spine. A body, all solid heat and muscle, caged me in. He didn't smell like a man. He smelled of the storm, of fresh blood, and of a possessive darkness that seemed to recognize my soul. And his eyes, those impossible golden eyes, I held no surprise at finding me, only the ancient fury of a predator, finally claiming its prey. Chapter 1. A Whisper of Blood. The forest breathed with her. It was a language Sereia understood better than words. A quiet conversation spoken in the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the cool scent of damp earth. Her life was a study in this silent tongue, and she was its most fluent speaker. Here, alone with her binoculars and the steady beat of her own heart, she was more than a tracker. She was a predator. She was home. Today's hunt was for a rare silver fox, its pelt commissioned by a wealthy collector. A simple job. The wind was in her favor as she moved with a practiced grace that left almost no trace. As she raised the binoculars, the worn leather strap brushed against the inside of her wrist, right over the pale crescent-shaped birthmark there. For a fleeting moment, an odd tingle radiated from the mark, a strange, humming energy that had no source, no reason. She dismissed it. Nerves, maybe. The air did feel heavy today, and that connection to the wilderness is why the new scent felt like a violation, a betrayal. It wasn't a part of the forest's natural vocabulary. It was a word of violence, sharp, coppery, thick with the tang of fresh blood. But beneath it, something else, something wilder. A raw, predatory musk that slithered through the air, a scent so primal it seemed to vibrate in her bones. It smelled of immense power. It smelled of rage. Her training kicked in, a lifetime of survival instinct screaming a single logical command. Run. A smell like that belonged to a fight she had no business witnessing. Any creature that bled that much and still smelled that powerful was an apex predator beyond anything she had ever known. And yet, her feet remained planted. The tingling in her wrist intensified from a hum to a low, insistent burn. What was happening to her? Her curiosity began to wrestle with her fear. She was a professional tracker, driven by an insatiable need to know, to identify, to understand the mysteries of her domain. And this was the greatest mystery she had ever encountered. The lure of it, the sheer wrongness of it was a hook in her soul. She lowered her binoculars, her mission forgotten. Every instinct she had told her to turn away. But a deeper, more ancient part of her, a part she never knew existed, started walking toward it. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Line. The pull led her to the edge of the world, or at least, the edge of her world. Before her lay the unseen border of the Blackridge territory, a place of ghost stories and cautionary tales. No one from her town ever crossed this line, because the forest beyond it wasn't just wild, it was rumored to be hungry. The trees here grew thicker, their branches clawing at the sky and choking the sunlight. The very air felt different, heavy, charged. The trail had become undeniable. Splatters of dark blood, impossibly crimson against the green moss, painted a gruesome path into the forbidden woods. She knelt. Her gloved fingers hovered over a partial paw print in the soft mud. It was massive. Far too large for a bear. Deeper than any wolf she'd ever tracked. The shape was canine, but the sheer scale of it belonged to a monster from a forgotten age. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, unnerving silence of the forest. The birds had stopped singing. This silence was more terrifying than any sound. It was a respectful hush, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Sereia thought of her mother, a fleeting memory, a panicked whisper from her childhood. There are things in those woods, Sereia, things that wear the skins of beasts, but have the eyes of men. You must never, ever go there. She had always assumed it was just a story a tail to keep a reckless child from getting lost. But now, standing here, with the scent of slaughter in the air and a monstrous track at her feet, it felt less like a story. It felt like a warning. Despite the dread, she took a steadying breath, pushed a low-hanging branch aside. She had to see. It wasn't a choice anymore. The compulsion was a physical ache in her chest, a burning on her wrist that demanded she bear witness. She moved slowly, a shadow slipping between ancient moss-covered oaks, her senses on fire. The scent was overpowering now, a thick cocktail of blood, sweat, and that untamed, musky rage. She could hear it now, too. Not a roar, but the wet, ugly sounds of a struggle. A pained grunt, the sickening tear of flesh. She peered through a final curtain of leaves into a small, ravaged clearing, and her world tilted. It wasn't a beast fighting another beast. It was a wolf, a creature of impossible size, its fur the color of a starless night, fighting against a group of men. The wolf was a blur of black fur and flashing teeth, but it was wounded, its movements growing sluggish. The men were coordinated, armed with silver knives that glinted in the gloom. Sereia's breath hitched. She saw the wolf falter, its massive shoulders slick with blood, and felt a bizarre, inexplicable pang of protectiveness. This was the monster in the woods, and she found herself desperately wanting it to live. Chapter 3. A Scent on the Windpane. Fury. Blood. The fire was familiar, but this was different. The cold, silver-laced agony that bit deep, that sought to unmake him. His massive form shuddered, muscles screaming as he threw another attacker against a tree. A sickening crunch. Fury was his shield. Rage was his fuel. He fought for his life. He fought for his pack. He fought for this territory, a sacred trust. These were not mere hunters. They were rogues, scum. Wolves who had abandoned their packs, their honor, driven by a lust for power they hadn't earned. And they were winning. He was Kalen, alpha of the Black Ridge pack, and he was being brought to his knees. They had ambushed him. A cowardly attack. He was growing weak, the silver poison in his veins sapping the primal strength that defined him. A roar ripped from his throat, half challenge, half desperation. Then, it happened. A scent, unlike anything he had ever known, cut through the battlefield haze. It wasn't the scent of a wolf. It was human, but it was more, so much more. The smell of wood smoke and wild honey, of summer rain on warm earth. It was a fever that shot straight into his blood, a warmth that pushed back against the silver's chill. It was everything. His wolf, the beast raging within him, lifted its head, momentarily distracted. A dangerous, foolish thing to do. An attacker seized the opportunity, slicing a deep gash across his flank. He snarled, snapping his jaws, but the damage was done. His mind reeled. The scent was a brand on his soul, an impossible pull that demanded his attention, because it was a scent the elders had warned him about his entire life. The scent of a fated mate, the one other soul that could either complete an alpha or shatter him entirely. He had always believed it to be a myth, a romantic tale. Yet here it was, real and maddeningly close, appearing at the worst possible moment. Was this some cruel joke by the moon goddess? To show him his destiny only to have it ripped away? Because of this distraction, he faltered again. The rogue leader, a scarred brute with dead eyes, saw his opening. He lunged. His silver blade aimed for Kalen's throat. Kalen met the attack, but he was too slow, too drained. The blade bit into his shoulder. He roared in agony. He was going to die here, fail his pack, all because of a ghost on the wind, a scent that promised a future he would never have. He braced for the final blow, his vision tunneling. The beautiful, torturous scent, the last thing his senses would register. Until a sudden, piercing hiss shot through the air, followed by a brilliant flash of red light that bloomed against the darkened sky. Chapter 4. The Crimson Bloom. What have I done? The question was a silent scream in her mind, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. Her hand, still clutching the warm metal of the flare gun, trembled violently. It had moved on its own, a spasm of pure, unthinking instinct that defied all logic, all training, all self-preservation. One moment she was a hidden observer, a ghost in the trees. The next, she was a participant, an accomplice. She had seen the massive wolf falter, had watched the silver blade begin its final, lethal descent, and something inside her, something ancient and fiercely protective, had simply acted. The hiss of the flare leaving the barrel was an obscenely loud tear in the fabric of the forest's quiet. Sereia flinched, pressing herself deeper into the ferns, her heart trying to claw its way out of her throat. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the sky above the clearing ignited. A brilliant crimson flower of light bloomed against the twilight, painting the brutal scene below in shades of blood and fire. The sudden, unnatural daylight was a shock to the senses. The rogues cried out, momentarily blinded, their coordinated attack shattering into chaos as they shielded their eyes. That single moment of confusion was all the great beast needed. Following that brief pause, a guttural roar of pure, untamed fury erupted from the wolf's throat. It was a sound that didn't just pierce the air, it vibrated through the ground, a promise of retribution made manifest. He moved, a blur of shadow and death. Sereia watched, mesmerized and horrified as the tide of the battle turned with shocking finality. He was no longer a wounded animal fighting for survival. He was a force of nature. He was vengeance. A rogue lunged, and the wolf's jaws snapped shut with a sound like a bear trap, ending the man's life instantly. Another tried to flee and was swatted from his feet by a paw the size of a dinner plate, claws tearing through leather and flesh. It was a whirlwind of violence, a terrifyingly efficient storm of tooth and claw that was over almost as soon as it began. In the aftermath, a chilling silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the ragged, heaving breaths of the colossal wolf. He stood amidst the carnage he had wrought, his magnificent black fur matted with his own blood and that of his enemies. The crimson light of the flare began to fade, casting long, dancing shadows that made the scene even more nightmarish. Sereia's mind raced, a torrent of panicked thoughts. Run. Now. Before it sees you. Before it realizes what you did. Her muscles were coiled, ready to spring, ready to flee back to the world of logic and reason. However, she was frozen in place because the beast wasn't looking at the bodies at its feet. It slowly lifted its massive head, steam puffing from its nostrils in the cool air. And its eyes, intelligent, burning, and an impossible shade of gold, found her hiding spot. They stared right at her. There was no mistaking it. He knew exactly where she was. Fear, cold and absolute, washed over her. But it wasn't fear of an animal. This was something else entirely. As she watched, paralyzed, a low groan escaped the wolf's throat, and something impossible began to happen. A ripple went through its body. The sickening, wet sound of bone breaking and reshaping echoed in the silent clearing. The monster was
Chapter
changing.
5. The man in the bee's relief was a foreign concept, but the searing flash of red light was the closest he'd ever come to it. The rogue's momentary blindness was a gift from the moon goddess herself, an unexpected reprieve in a fight he was destined to lose. Kalen seized it. He let the beast take over completely, surrendering to the primal rage he so often kept chained. He became the alpha. He became the executioner. The fight was swift, brutal, and final. He stood over the last body, the coppery tang of his victory thick in the air, his great lungs heaving. He had survived. His territory was secure. But the scent, that impossible, maddening scent, was stronger now. It was no longer a ghost on the wind. It was a real, physical presence pulling at him, demanding his attention. Wood smoke and wild honey. And underneath it all, the sharp, clean aroma of fear. His mate was here. She had been watching, and she was terrified. His golden wolf eyes scanned the edge of the clearing, cutting through the shadows with an ease no human could ever possess. He found her instantly, a small, trembling shape hidden in the ferns. The tracker. Then the pain hit him. A wave of agony from the silver poisoning. A fire that reminded him how close he'd come to death. The shift was coming. An involuntary reversal forced by his exhaustion and injuries. It was never pleasant, but this time it was torture. A groan ripped from his throat as the transformation began. Bones snapped, reforming with wet, grinding cracks. Muscles tore and re-knitted themselves into a different shape. His fur receded into his skin, his snout shortening, his entire being contorting from a 400-pound wolf back into the form of a man. He collapsed onto his hands and knees, naked, panting, his body slick with a mixture of sweat and blood. He was vulnerable, he was exposed, and his mate had seen it all. Sereia couldn't breathe. Her lungs refused to work. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. The creature, the wolf, was convulsing. Its massive form twisted and broke in ways that defied nature, its agonized groans echoing in the dead quiet. She watched in frozen horror as fur became skin, as a snout became a human face, as paws became hands and feet. The monster from the woods was a man. A naked, powerfully built man, kneeling in the dirt, his broad shoulders heaving with every ragged breath. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and blood, his and others, streaked his muscular torso. He looked up, and his eyes were the same impossible burning gold as the wolf's. They locked onto hers, and the world just stopped. He moved faster than anything human had a right to, a blur of controlled fury that closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. Sereia finally broke from her paralysis and scrambled backward, but it was useless. He was on her in an instant. The forest floor vanished. Her world became the rough bark of an oak at her back and the solid, radiating heat of his body caging her in. He didn't smell like a man. He smelled of pine, fresh blood, and a possessive darkness that seemed to recognize her on a cellular level. He slammed one hand against the tree beside her head, the wood groaning in protest. His face was inches from hers, those golden eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. It was fury, yes, but there was something else beneath it. Something that looked almost like desperation. "Do you have a death wish, little tracker?" he growled, and the sound was a low, rumbling vibration that she felt deep in her chest. It wasn't a human voice. It was the sound of the beast, wrapped in the cords of a man's throat. She could only shake her head, her voice stolen by terror. "You saw nothing here," he commanded, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "There was no fight. There was no wolf. And you were never in my woods." He leaned closer, his scent overwhelming her, his heat a suffocating blanket. "Go back to your little town, pack your things, and you leave these mountains forever. Do you understand me?" She managed a frantic nod. He held her gaze for one more heart-stopping second, his jaw tight, his nostrils flared. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, vanishing back into the oppressive shadows of Blackridge, leaving her alone, trembling, and branded by the encounter. Her world had been irrevocably fractured. Chapter 6. The Hunter's Debt. 2 Nights. For 2 nights, Sereia had lived in a world without solid ground. Every shadow seemed to hold the shape of a wolf. Every gust of wind seemed to carry his scent, his growled command. Leave these mountains forever. She had spent the time in a feverish haze, her mind replaying the impossible transformation, the feel of his body against hers, the terrifying intensity in those golden eyes. He had ordered her to run, and a part of her, the sane part, knew he was right. She should be miles away from here by now, but another, more stubborn part of her, the part that had defined her entire life, rebelled. This was her home. These mountains were in her blood. Who was this creature to command her to leave? And a deeper, more troubling question haunted her waking moments and stalked her dreams. Why had he let her go? He could have killed her, easily. He had slaughtered a dozen armed men, yet he had spared her. The contradiction was a splinter in her mind she couldn't remove. She was packing a bag now, in the dim lamplight of her small, isolated cabin, but she didn't know if she was packing to leave, or just packing to be ready. Ready for what, she didn't know. The answer came with the sound of splintering wood. The cabin door burst inward, ripped from its hinges with a single violent blow. Sereia screamed, stumbling backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife on her table. Two figures filled the doorway, silhouetted against the moonless night. They were the same men from the clearing, or men just like them. Their eyes held a feral, hungry light, and their lips were curled back in snarling grins. More of them were circling the cabin, their shadows passing by the windows. They had found her. But how? "Look what we have here," the first one rasped, stepping into the cabin. He sniffed the air deeply, his smile widening. "She smells like him," the alpha marked her. Her blood ran cold. Marked her? She thought back to him pinning her against the tree, his scent clinging to her clothes, her skin. Had he branded her somehow? Had he led them right to her? Before she could process the betrayal, they lunged. She was a fighter, she was a survivor, but she was no match for this. One grabbed her arms while the other ripped the knife from her hand. Fear, sharp and blinding, consumed her. This was it. This was how she died. Suddenly, the night outside exploded into a symphony of savagery. A roar, the same one from the clearing, but 10 times more furious, shattered the air. The man holding her froze, his eyes wide with terror. A heartbeat later, he was ripped away from her, pulled back through the ruined doorway by an unseen force. Sereia scrambled away, pressing herself against the far wall as the sounds of a massacre began just outside her home. Snarls, screams, the wet crunch of bone. It was the clearing all over again, but this time, the violence was on her doorstep. It was over in seconds. Silence fell once more, heavy and absolute. Then, a figure stepped through the doorway. It was him. Kalen. He stood there, in the form of a man this time, his chest bare and heaving, his hands stained with fresh blood. His golden eyes found hers, and they weren't filled with relief. They were chips of ice, cold with a terrifying fury and a grim, resolute darkness. She thought he was here to save her. She thought the look on his face was because he was angry at the rogues for hurting her. She was wrong. With 3 long strides, he crossed the room. He didn't say a word. He didn't offer a hand. He simply bent down, hooked a powerful arm under her legs, and threw her over his shoulder like a sack of grain. Sereia cried out, beating her fists against the hard muscle of his back. "What are you doing?" "Put me down." His only response was a low growl that vibrated through his entire body and into hers. "They marked you because of me," he bit out, his voice a harsh rasp. "Now I'm marking you as mine." He turned and strode out of her ruined home, leaving her shattered life behind. He didn't stop at the tree line. He plunged directly into the suffocating darkness of the Black Ridge territory, carrying her deeper and deeper into a world from which she knew there would be no escape. She wasn't being rescued. She was being taken.
Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. Sereia woke to a world of softness and silence. The first thing she registered was the bed, a mattress so deep and comfortable it felt like sinking into a cloud. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the rustic, firm cot in her own cabin. The second was the scent, not the familiar perfume of pine and damp earth that she was used to, but the clean, sharp aroma of cedar wood, dried herbs, and something else. Something distinctly masculine and musky that reminded her of the forest after a storm. It was his scent. Her eyes snapped open. She wasn't in her cabin. This room was larger, the walls made of smooth, polished logs, the floor covered by a thick fur rug. A fire crackled peacefully in a stone hearth across the room, casting a warm, golden glow. It was beautiful, it was comfortable, and it was a prison. She threw the heavy quilt off and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The windows, she saw immediately, were not made of glass but of a thick amber-like resin and reinforced with intricate iron bars shaped like sprawling tree branches. The door was solid oak with no handle on her side. A gilded cage. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she ruthlessly shoved it down. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival was about observation. It was about finding the weakness in any trap. She began a slow, methodical search of the room. The furniture was heavy, immovable. The walls were solid. She ran her hands along the floorboards near the wall, searching for a loose one, a potential hiding spot, anything. Her fingers brushed against a board that had a fraction more give than the others. Hope, a tiny, fragile spark, ignited within her. As she pressed on it, a shadow fell across the window. She froze. Outside, a figure stood motionless, a silent, hulking guard whose presence she hadn't even sensed. He wasn't looking at the woods. He was looking directly at her. His head tilted slightly, a clear, unspoken message. I know what you are doing. Stop. Consequently, a profound sense of hopelessness washed over her. These weren't just men, they were hunters, just like her, only more. She retreated to the bed just as a soft knock echoed, followed by the sound of a key turning in a lock. The door swung open to reveal a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was older, her long dark hair braided with silver threads, and she carried a tray laden with food. I am Lyra, she said, her voice as soft as her expression. The Alpha asked me to look after you. You must be hungry. Lyra placed the tray on a small table. It held roasted meat, fresh bread, and a steaming mug of tea. The woman's presence was so calming, so normal, it was deeply unsettling. Where am I? Sereia asked, her voice raspy. You are safe, Lyra replied, which wasn't an answer at all. Kalen, the Alpha, he can be intense, but he is not cruel. She offered another small, reassuring smile. Eat. You will need your strength. Lyra's gaze then drifted down to Sereia's wrist, where the crescent birthmark was visible against her pale skin. For the briefest of moments, the woman's gentle mask flickered. An unreadable emotion, was it sorrow, recognition, flashed in her eyes before being expertly hidden away. Lyra turned to leave, her movements once again serene. But Sereia had seen it. This kind, gentle healer knew something. She was another piece of a puzzle Sereia couldn't comprehend, leaving her alone with a new, chilling question. Who was she, and why was her own skin a source of secrets? Chapter 8. Lessons in Fire. She refused to eat. It was the only act of rebellion she had left, a small, silent protest in a world where she had no control. Hours passed. The fire dwindled to glowing embers. Sereia sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her stomach aching with hunger, her mind racing. She was a prisoner, a captive of a man who was not a man, in a place that shouldn't exist. She had to get out. She had to. The door didn't open with a polite knock this time. It was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall, making the whole cabin shudder. Kalen filled the doorway, a storm of contained fury in his eyes. He wasn't shirtless now. He wore simple leather trousers and a dark tunic that did little to hide the raw power in his shoulders and chest. His golden gaze swept the room, landing on the untouched tray of food, and his jaw tightened. So, the little tracker has a death wish after all, he growled, the sound a low vibration of menace. Before she could react, he crossed the room, grabbed her by the arm, and hauled her to her feet. His grip was like iron. If you are determined to be a target, he snarled, dragging her out of the cabin and into the crisp, cold air, You will at least learn how to fight back." He pulled her into a large, dusty clearing surrounded by towering pines. Other pack members watched from a distance, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Kaylin shoved her toward the center of the ring. "You think because you can track a fox, you can survive out here? You are a child in these woods." He picked up a long, blunted wooden knife from a rack and threw it at her feet. "Pick it up. Fight me." "No," she spat, her own anger flaring to life. "I am not your plaything." "No," he agreed, his voice dangerously soft as he began to circle her. "You are my responsibility. A responsibility I never asked for." He lunged, not with the knife, but with his bare hands. She yelped and dodged, her tracker's agility serving her well. He came at her again and again, his movements a blur of speed and precision. He wasn't trying to hurt her, she realized. He was testing her, hurting her, showing her just how outmatched she was. Humiliation and fury burned in her gut. She would not be his victim. She finally dove for the wooden knife, rolling to her feet with the blade held awkwardly in her hand.
He saw the shift in her eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was sharpened by a fierce, defiant fire. Good. Fear was useless without anger to fuel it. He watched as she gripped the practice knife, her stance all wrong, but her intent clear. He had to do this. He had to break through her stubborn human pride because her scent, that sweet, maddening scent of rain and honey, was a beacon to every rogue and rival pack for 100 miles. She was walking through his world with a lantern in the dark, and she didn't even know it. He moved, his attack faster this time. She parried, clumsy but effective, using her smaller size to her advantage. She was quick, she was smart. She ducked under his arm and tried to trip him. A tracker's trick. A flicker of grudging admiration went through him. For a human, she had spirit. But spirit wouldn't save her from a shifter with silver claws. He needed her to understand the sheer brutal power she was up against. He allowed her a moment of false confidence, letting her push him back a step. Then, he ended it. In a single, fluid motion, he twisted the knife from her grasp, spun her around, and slammed her onto the dirt, his body covering hers, pinning her beneath his weight. Her breath left her in a sharp gasp. The scent of her, fear, fury, and something intoxicatingly female, filled his lungs, and the beast inside him roared with possessive satisfaction. His control, already frayed, threatened to snap. He could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his chest. He could feel the soft curves of her body pressed against the hard planes of his. He wanted to lower his head, to bury his face in her neck, to mark her skin with his teeth. He pushed the thought away, his voice coming out as a harsh, guttural growl right beside her ear. "Do you think the forest is safe just because you can't smell the danger?" "I can." He pressed down slightly, making her feel his strength, his absolute dominance. "And right now, little tracker, you smell like an invitation to everything in it." He felt her shudder beneath him, and a savage part of him gloried in it. He held her there for a moment longer, a war raging inside him between the alpha who had to teach her and the male who wanted to claim her. Then, with a curse, he pushed himself off her, leaving her breathless in the dirt.
Chapter 9. The alpha's mark humiliation was a hot, bitter coal in her stomach. Sereia lay on the training ground for a long moment after he left, the imprint of his body a phantom heat on hers, his scent clinging to her like a second skin. He had proven his point. She was helpless here, powerless, a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't begin to understand. That evening, he came for her again, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. "You will eat with the pack," was all he said. It wasn't a request. He led her to a large, long hall filled with the clamor of voices and the smell of roasting meat. A massive fire roared in a hearth big enough to stand in. Dozens of people, men, women, even a few children, sat at long wooden tables, but the room fell silent the moment she and Kaylin entered. Every eye turned to her. She had never felt so exposed, so utterly alien. These weren't just people. They were predators, their gazes sharp and assessing, their stillness that of a wolf pack watching a deer wander into its territory. She felt a desperate urge to run, but Kaylin's hand on her lower back was a firm, unyielding pressure, guiding her to the head table. They sat, and the noise slowly returned. But it was different now. Subdued. Sereia kept her eyes on the wooden plate in front of her, trying to will herself invisible. It didn't work. She could feel their stares. She could hear their whispered comments. After what felt like an eternity, a large, heavily scarred man with a grizzled beard and cold, calculating eyes stood up from a nearby table. His movements were slow, deliberate, a clear challenge. "Alpha," the man began, his voice a low, rumbling growl that commanded attention. The hall fell silent again. "We follow your law. We trust your judgment. But this—" He gestured a thick, dismissive hand in Sereia's direction. "This is a human, a stray. You bring her into our home, into the heart of our territory. Have you forgotten the price we paid for trusting a human before?" A murmur went through the crowd, a wave of old anger and pain.
Kaylin felt the challenge like a physical blow. It was Gunnar. Of course it was Gunnar. He had been questioning Kaylin's authority since the death of his father, the previous Alpha. Gunnar was using the human, his human, as a pawn to test his strength in front of the entire pack. And he was using the memory of the last betrayal, a human who had sold information about their patrols, leading to the death of Kaylin's own brother, as his weapon. Rage, cold and precise, flooded Kaylin's veins. It was one thing to challenge him. It was another to threaten her. He watched Sereia. She was trying to shrink into herself, her face pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the shame of being publicly condemned. And in that moment, his decision was no longer tactical. It was primal. She was his. Whether by the goddess's will or by his own damn stubbornness, she belonged to him now, and no one in this hall or any other would make her feel threatened. Not ever again. He rose to his feet, the scrape of his chair echoing like a thunderclap in the silent hall. He didn't look at Gunnar. He didn't address the pack. He walked the few steps to Sereia's side. She flinched as he approached, expecting he didn't know what. He reached out, placing his hand firmly on the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. She froze, a small gasp escaping her lips. He leaned down, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Do not be afraid," he murmured. Then, he pulled her gently but firmly against his side, turning to face Gunnar, his arm a possessive bar behind her back. He let his power, his true alpha nature, flow out of him. It wasn't a scent that could be described in simple terms. It was a wave of pure, undiluted dominance. It was the scent of ownership, of territory, of a promise of violence so absolute that it silenced all thought of opposition. The air grew thick with it. The entire pack could feel it, could taste it. It was a declaration. He finally met Gunnar's eyes, his own golden gaze turning hard as stone. His voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the hall, laced with deadly intent. "She stays." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Touch her, and I will break more than your bones." The challenge was over. The statement was made. He had just marked her in front of his entire world, a claim that was both a shield and a cage.
Chapter 10. Scars and Silence. The silence in his room was heavier than in the gilded cage. It was a weighted stillness, thick with the scent of antiseptic herbs, blood, and the storm that was perpetually brewing inside the man sitting on the edge of the bed. Kaylin had been injured during the evening patrol, a deep gash on his side from a rogue's silver-laced blade. Now, he sat with his tunic off, his back rigid, and ordered her to tend to the wound. Not asked. Ordered. Sereia approached with the medical kit Lyra had given her, her movements calm and professional. It was a role she could play, a familiar mask of detachment to hide the tremor in her hands. His torso was a roadmap of violence, a tapestry of scars, pale and silver against his tanned skin, told a story of 100 battles she couldn't imagine. Some were thin and faded, others were puckered and angry. Each mark was a testament to the brutal life he led, and for the first time she saw him not as a monster but as a survivor, a king who had to fight for his throne every single day. Her anger, which had been simmering since the training yard, began to soften into something more complicated, something dangerously close to empathy. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She dipped a cloth into a bowl of warm, herb-infused water. As she gently cleaned the wound, her fingers brushed against the hot skin of his side. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. His entire body went rigid beneath her touch. She pulled her hand back as if burned, but he made no move, no sound. There was only the tense, charged silence stretching between them. She chanced to look at his face. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was watching her, his golden eyes narrowed, a raw vulnerability in their depths that she had never seen before. The alpha was gone for a moment, and in his place was just a man, wounded and weary. The loneliness she saw there was a mirror to her own, a quiet ache she recognized instantly.
Her touch was fire. It was agony. It was the first gentle thing he had felt in years, and it threatened to shatter the iron wall of control he had built around himself. Kalen kept his breathing even, his expression a mask of indifference, but inside, his wolf was howling. The silver in the wound burned, but her touch was a different kind of pain, a sweet, piercing ache in the center of his soul. He watched her, the careful concentration on her face, the way her brow furrowed slightly. She smelled of clean soap and a faint womanly scent that was entirely her own, a fragrance that cut through the metallic tang of blood and made his head spin. He had spent his life surrounded by his pack, yet he had never been more alone. The weight of being alpha was a crown of stone, isolating him, forcing him to be the monster everyone needed him to be. But this human, this tracker, she looked at his scars, and he didn't see disgust in her eyes. He saw understanding. It was terrifying. It was addicting. He was overwhelmed by an instinct so fierce, so possessive, that it was all he could do not to pull her into his lap and bury his face in her hair. He had to keep her safe. He had to keep her close. The contradictions were tearing him apart. As she finished dressing the wound, her hand lingered near his. He couldn't stop himself. His own hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist, right over the faint crescent-shaped mark. Her skin was soft, her pulse a frantic bird beating against his thumb. He held her gaze, the silence crackling with 1,000 unspoken words. He wanted to tell her. What? That he was sorry? That she was his only weakness? That her scent was the only thing that made him feel sane? The door to his chamber burst open. Alpha! The moment shattered. Kalen dropped her wrist as if it were hot iron, the alpha mask slamming back into place. His beta Rorik stood in the doorway, his face grim. The rogues. They're organized. They hit the southern perimeter, just like the scouts warned. It's a bigger group this time. Kalen rose to his feet, the vulnerability gone, replaced by the cold, hard steel of a commander. Ready the warriors, he commanded. He didn't look at Sereia again, but he could feel her eyes on him, full of fear and a new, dawning horror as she realized that every drop of blood spilled on his land tonight was because of her. Chapter 11. The Ghost on the Cliff. Restlessness was a poison in his veins. Hours later, the rogue attack had been repelled, but the victory felt hollow. Kalen stood at his window, staring out at the moonlit wilderness of his territory. From the mountains below, a sound began to rise. A single mournful howl, quickly joined by another, and another, until the night was filled with the soulful, haunting chorus of his pack. It was Howl Night, a ritual of unity, of grief for the fallen, of reaffirming their bond to the land and to each other. Tonight, the song felt different. It felt incomplete. The scent of her lingered in his room, a constant, gentle torment. The memory of her touch, of the fear and understanding in her eyes, was a brand on his mind. He had to make her understand. Not just the danger she was in, but the world she had fallen into. The why of it all. This secrecy, this wall between them, was a weakness he could no longer afford. He made a decision, one that went against every instinct for self-preservation he had. He was going to show her his deepest scar. He found her in her room, the gilded cage, sitting by the cold hearth, looking small and lost. She flinched when he entered, her eyes immediately wary. "Come with me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. It was not a command this time. It was an invitation. He led her in silence through the sleeping pack compound and up a winding, hidden path. He took her to the Alpha's overlook, a sacred place, a wide, flat cliff top that offered a breathtaking panorama of the entire valley under the silver light of the full moon. The pack's howl swelled around them, a wild and beautiful symphony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. This was the heart of his world. He had never brought an outsider here. He had never brought anyone here since his brother's death.
She followed him, her fear warring with a strange, compelling curiosity. He led her not to a prison or a training yard, but to a place of profound and staggering beauty. The entire world seemed to spread out below them, a sea of silver-tipped trees and shadowed valleys. The howling wasn't frightening up here, it was beautiful, filled with a deep, ancient longing that resonated with a part of her soul she didn't know she had. She looked at Kalen. In the moonlight, the hard lines of his face were softened and the weight of his burdens was plain to see. He looked haunted. "My brother Liam was killed on a night like this," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper that was nearly lost in the wind. "Right down there near the southern ridge." Sereia listened, frozen, as he finally gave her the truth. He spoke of Liam, his charismatic and kind younger brother. He spoke of the human woman Liam had fallen for, a woman the pack had welcomed, a woman who had learned their patrols, their weaknesses, their heart. A woman who had sold that information to a rival pack for a pouch of gold. "It was an ambush," Kalen said, his voice thick with a grief that was still raw. "They were slaughtered. My brother, he died trying to give the others time to escape. I found him at sunrise. The pack's paranoia, Gunner's hatred, Kalen's cold fury, it all clicked into place. It wasn't just prejudice, it was a wound. A deep, festering wound that had never been allowed to heal. He had become Alpha that day, forced to lead a shattered and grieving pack, his heart encased in ice. He was a prisoner of his own past. She looked at him, the powerful Alpha, the terrifying beast, the lonely man, and the last of her fear simply evaporated. It was replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. This creature, this predator, was not a source of danger. He was a source of deep, unending pain. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she whispered. The words hung in the air between them, a fragile truce under the watchful eye of the moon.
And as they stood on the cliff, two lonely souls finding the barest glimmer of connection, a different kind of ritual was taking place back in the heart of the compound. In the quiet of the main lodge's kitchen, Lyra, the gentle healer with the kind eyes, moved with silent, graceful purpose. Her face, usually a mask of serene compassion, was cold and resolute in the flickering lamplight. She opened a small leather pouch tied at her waist, a pouch that held a fine, dark, odorless powder. With a hand that did not tremble, she carefully sprinkled the entire contents into the Alpha's personal carafe of wine, the one he drank every night before sleep to soothe the aches of his duties. A single, tearless drop of sorrow traced a path down her cheek as she swirled the poisoned wine, her lips forming a silent, bitter word. Vengeance. Chapter 12. A scent of fire. A whisper of ash. A fragile truce had settled between them in the days following the night on the cliff. It wasn't peace, but it was a silence that held promise instead of hostility. Kalen found himself taking Sereia on his patrols, a decision that had earned him more than a few questioning looks from his pack. He told himself it was practical. Her senses, honed by a lifetime of tracking, were different from his own. She saw things he overlooked. She noticed disturbances in the forest floor that his wolf's gaze would pass right by. She was a weapon, and he would be a fool not to use her. That was the lie he told himself. The truth was, her presence beside him felt right. It settled a restlessness in his soul that had plagued him for years. "There," she whispered, her voice a low murmur that didn't disturb the forest's quiet. She pointed to a faint disturbance of moss on a granite boulder. Someone used ash to cover their scent, an old tracker's trick. He would have missed it. His own senses, powerful as they were attuned to the scent of blood and sweat, not the subtle perfume of cold ash. He felt a surge of something that felt dangerously like pride. She was magnificent in this element, her focus absolute, her movements a fluid dance of deadly grace. As they moved to silently encircle the rogue scout's position, a wave of profound dizziness washed over him. His vision swam. His muscles, which could tear a tree from its roots, suddenly felt like water. He stumbled, catching his weight against the rough bark of a pine, a harsh gasp tearing from his lungs. The weakness was gone as quickly as it came, but a cold dread remained. This wasn't normal. This wasn't him.
She saw him falter. It was just for a second, a barely perceptible break in his powerful stride, but she saw it. She saw the flash of confusion and raw vulnerability in his golden eyes before the alpha mask slammed back into place. It was the second time she had seen that look, and it sent a chill of unease down her spine. Kalen was a force of nature, a creature of boundless stamina and strength. For him to stumble like that, something was deeply wrong. He gave her a sharp, silent hand signal and they moved into position. Their attack was a thing of brutal poetry. She created the diversion, a perfectly thrown stone that drew the rogue's attention to the left, and Kalen exploded from the shadows on the right. He was a blur of motion, ending the fight before the scout could even cry out. Their coordination was seamless, their instincts perfectly in sync. They were a team. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating, but as he stood over the fallen rogue, his chest heaving slightly more than it should, the image of his momentary weakness haunted her. It was a dissonant note in the powerful song of the alpha, a whisper of ash that hinted at a fire burning from within.
Chapter 13. The Healer's Garden. The scent of drying herbs hung thick in the air of Lyra's den, a place that should have felt calming, but now only put Sereia on edge. She found the healer grinding petals with a mortar and pestle, her movements as serene and practiced as ever. Sereia had come on a mission, her worry for Kalen a tight knot in her chest. She needed answers, and Lyra was the only one who might have them. "Lyra?" she began, forcing a casual tone. "I'm worried about Kalen. On the patrol today, he seemed tired, he almost fell." Lyra looked up, her expression a mask of deep, believable sympathy. A soft, sad smile touched her lips. "The alpha pushes himself too hard," she murmured, her voice a gentle balm. "And the silver poisoning from that first attack, it can linger for weeks, Sereia. It gets into the blood, causing a deep fatigue that even his healing cannot easily fight." She gestured to a row of dark bottles on a nearby shelf. "I have been giving him strengthening tonics every night. He just needs time to fully recover. Your concern for him does you credit." The explanation was perfect. It was logical. It made absolute sense. It should have put Sereia's fears to rest. So why did every instinct she possessed scream that it was a lie? It was because Lyra's eyes, those kind, gentle eyes, didn't quite meet hers. They focused on the herbs, the bottles, the walls, anywhere but directly on Sereia. "Thank you," Sereia said, forcing a smile of her own. "You've put my mind at ease." "Of course, dear," Lyra replied, turning back to her work. "Let me get you a cup of calming tea for your nerves." As the healer moved past her to the kettle, her sleeve brushed against Sereia's arm. In that brief moment of contact, Sereia caught it, hidden beneath the overwhelming aroma of mint and chamomile. A different scent clung to Lyra's skin. It was a faint, bitter, almost metallic smell, like crushed rock and a flower that bloomed only in the dead of night. It was an unnatural scent, a scent that felt like a secret, a scent that felt like death. The knot in Sereia's chest tightened into a band of pure ice. The kindness was a lie. The concern was a performance. The healer was a poisoner. Chapter 14. The trap is sprung. The alarm howl was a raw, desperate scream that ripped through the night. Attack, a full-scale assault. Rogues were pouring over the northern wall, a coordinated invasion that spoke of careful planning and inside knowledge. He grabbed his blades, roaring for his warriors, his body moving through a thick, invisible syrup. The weakness was worse tonight, a leaden fatigue that dulled his senses and slowed his reflexes. The poison, Lyra's tonics, were working. He fought his way toward the breach, his mind a chaotic storm of fury and a dawning, horrifying realization. He saw them. A second wave of rogues, flooding in through the eastern gate, a gate that had been sealed, barred from the inside. But it stood wide open now. And holding it open, her face illuminated by the battle fire, her expression a mask of serene, heartbreaking grief, was Lyra. Their eyes met across the chaos. The betrayal was a physical blow, more potent than any silver blade. It wasn't just an attack on his pack. It was an attack on him, orchestrated by someone he had trusted with his life.
The world devolved into a nightmare of screams and clashing steel. From the window of the main lodge, Sereia watched the battle rage, her heart pounding. Then she saw it. She saw Lyra at the eastern gate. She saw the rogues pouring through. The memory of the bitter, deathly scent on the healer's hands, the plausible lies, the averted eyes. It all slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. It was her. It was always her. She opened her mouth to scream a warning to Kalen, to tell him of the treachery, but the sound was choked off. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth from behind. The main lodge, which should have been the safest place in the compound, had been breached. The rogue leader, a hulking brute with a triumphant, cruel sneer, stood before her. His guards seized her arms, their grips like iron. They weren't there to fight. They were there for her. A cloth was shoved in her mouth, silencing her cries. She was dragged outside, a trophy to be presented. Kalen had just fought his way toward the eastern gate, his face a mask of primal fury as he confronted Lyra. He turned at the rogue leader's shout, and he froze. He saw her. He saw her in the brute's grasp, a gleaming silver knife pressed against the soft skin of her throat. He saw Lyra standing beside them, her betrayal now absolute and complete. He saw the impossible choice laid out before him. The trap wasn't just for his pack or for his life, it was a trap for his soul.
Chapter 15. A debt of blood time stopped. The world narrowed to the sight of her, the silver blade pressed against the delicate skin of her throat, her eyes wide with a terror that was a physical blow to his soul. The rogue leader, a scarred brute named Malik, grinned, his victory assured. Around them, the battle had ceased, his pack warriors held at bay by the rogues, all watching their alpha, brought to a standstill by a single human female. The poison in his veins was a cold fire, but this was a helplessness far worse. A beautiful, tragic picture, isn't it, Kalen? Malik's voice was a triumphant sneer. And now, a choice. An impossible choice, courtesy of our dear Lyra. He gestured to the healer who stood beside him, her face a pale, emotionless mask. According to the old laws, if an alpha willingly takes the blood of his fated mate before the bond is complete, the magic turns sour. It will sever your connection to the beast, to the land, to your own power. You will be little more than a man. The words slammed into him. Lyra's betrayal was deeper than he could have imagined. She hadn't just weakened him, she had orchestrated the perfect checkmate. Malik's grin widened. So what will it be, Alpha? He taunted. Do you let the little tracker die to keep your power? Or do you give up everything that makes you you, for a human? The choice was a vice, crushing him. Her life, or his soul. Her death, or the death of the alpha within him. Both options were an agony beyond imagining. Both paths led to ruin.
Fear was a living thing, a cold serpent coiling in her gut. The edge of the blade was an icy promise against her skin. She could smell the sour breath of her captor, see the victory glittering in his cruel eyes. She watched Kalen, his powerful body held in an unnatural stillness, his face a mask of such torment it stole her breath. Then, Malik's gaze shifted, landing on her. A cold, dismissive smirk played on his lips. He probably never told you who you are, did he, Stray? He asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Why your scent drives him so mad? Sereia stared, confused. Your parents, Malik continued, savoring every word, were not just humans who wandered into the wrong woods. They were pack, part of a very special bloodline sworn to protect the pack's most sacred relic. He paused, letting the words sink in. But they were traitors. They stole the relic and fled in the night, leaving the pack vulnerable to the very attack that killed Kalen's dear brother Liam. No. It couldn't be. Oh, yes, Malik hissed, seeing the denial in her eyes. That little mark on your wrist, the crescent moon, it's the brand of their bloodline, the brand of their betrayal. He looked back at Kalen. She is the daughter of traitors, Alpha, a taint in your sacred forest. How does it feel to have your destiny tied to the very blood that cost you everything? The world fractured around Sereia, her parents. Traitors? Their mysterious disappearance, her mother's warnings. It all crashed down on her. She looked at Kalen and saw the fresh agony mixed with an old, familiar grief on his face. This wasn't just about her. It was about his brother. It was about a wound that had never healed. And she was the living, breathing embodiment of that betrayal.
Chapter 16. The Fall of the Alpha Betrayal. Taint, Sacrifice. The words were poison barbs, sinking deep into a soul already ravaged by Lyra's treachery. Kalen looked at Sereia, at the horror and confusion on her face as her entire history was rewritten as a crime. He saw the crescent mark on her wrist. The brand of a bloodline he now understood was both sacred and cursed. Malik thought he had presented a choice. He was wrong. There was no choice. There was never a choice. He would not sacrifice her. He would not sacrifice his power. He would kill every last one of them. A roar of pure, untamed alpha fury ripped from his throat, a sound of breaking chains and unleashed Armageddon. He chose the third option. He chose war. He lunged, a black-clad blur of motion aimed directly at Malik, at the man who dared to put a blade to his mate's throat. His fist connected with a rogue who tried to intercept him, but the impact, which should have shattered bone, only sent the man stumbling back. The poison. It was a leaden cloak wrapped around his muscles, a fog in his mind that delayed his instincts by a fatal half-second. His speed was gone. His legendary strength was a pale shadow of itself. His healing, which should have been closing the gash on his side, was now a dull, sluggish throb. He was fighting with the strength of a man, not an alpha. Malik met his charge with a laugh, easily sidestepping Kalen's attack and landing a brutal kick to his wounded side. Pain exploded behind Kalen's eyes. He staggered, his breath hissing through his teeth. This couldn't be happening. Humiliation burned hotter than the poison. He was the alpha of Blackridge. He was a creature of myth and power, and he was being dismantled in front of his pack. In front of her. He could see her face, see the terror in her eyes as she watched him fail. That sight was a greater agony than any physical blow. He fought with everything he had left, a desperate wild flurry of attacks fueled by sheer willpower. But it wasn't enough. Malik was a powerful shifter, and Kalen was a compromised one. The fight was brutal and blessedly short. A silver-hilted dagger caught him in the thigh, sending waves of icy fire through his leg. A crushing blow to the head sent him to his knees, the world spinning into a gray, hazy blur. He looked up through a mask of his own blood to see Malik standing over him, victorious. He had failed. He had failed his pack. He had failed his brother's memory. He had failed her. Malik raised his blade for the final blow, and in that moment, Kalen knew nothing but the cold, bitter taste of defeat.
Chapter 17. A Willing Sacrifice. Hope died. It withered and turned to ash in her chest as she watched him fall. The alpha, the beast, the man who had shown her his wounded soul on a moonlit cliff, was broken. He was on his knees, bloodied and defeated, the last of his strength gone. The world around her seemed to fade to a dull, soundless gray. This was the end. He was going to die, and then Malik would turn to her, and her story would be over, a tragic footnote written in the blood of traitors. She saw Malik raise a gleaming silver blade high, savoring the moment, a triumphant god about to execute a fallen king. And in that instant, that sliver of a second between the raising of the blade and its descent, something inside Sereia snapped. The fear didn't just vanish, it was incinerated. The despair was consumed by a blast of white-hot, furious resolve. Her parents may have been branded traitors, but they had done it to save her. Kalen, broken and kneeling, had been willing to die for her. A debt of love, a debt of sacrifice, and she would be damned if she let it be paid for nothing. She would not be a footnote. She would be the author of their ending. Kalen! Her voice was a raw, primal scream, a sound of such command and power that it ripped through the stunned silence of the battlefield. Every head, rogue and pack alike, snapped in her direction. Malik froze, his arms still raised, a flicker of annoyance on his face. Kalen looked up, his golden eyes glazed with pain and confusion. With a surge of adrenaline, Sereia ripped her arm from the loosened grasp of the rogue holding her. She didn't run. She held her ground, extending her arm out, her wrist exposed, the crescent mark a pale, luminous sigil in the gloom. "Take it!" she screamed, her voice ringing with an authority she never knew she possessed. Malik laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She's offering herself up! Foolish girl!" But Kalen understood. His gaze shifted from her eyes to the offered wrist, and a flicker of comprehension, of horror, of hope, ignited in their depths. "He's right," she cried, her words for Kalen and Kalen alone. "The choice is yours, but you will not die for me. You will live for us." Her voice dropped, but it was filled with an unshakable conviction. "Take my blood. Fight for our future. Trust me." It was the ultimate reversal, the helpless human offering power to the fallen beast. It was an act of faith so absolute, so insane, that it defied all logic. It was her answer to the impossible choice. She would not let him sacrifice his power or his life. She was sacrificing her own will, her own safety, placing her entire being into the hands of the predator before her. It was the final, terrifying test of their bond, and she met his gaze without flinching, her silent plea echoing in the space between them. Become the monster they fear, and save us all.
Chapter 18. The Blood Bond. Her words were a command, her eyes were a dare. Trust me. In that single suspended moment, With the scent of her blood already a phantom on his tongue, Kalen made his choice. It wasn't a choice born of strategy or alpha logic. It was a primal, instinctual surrender to the one soul in the universe that his own was screaming for. He would not lose her. He would burn the world to ash first. With a roar that was not a challenge to his enemy but an answer to her, he lunged, not at Malik, at Sereia. The rogues laughed, thinking it was a final, desperate act of betrayal. But as his fangs, sharp and sudden, pierced the delicate skin of her wrist, a shockwave of pure, untamed magic erupted from the point of contact. Her blood was liquid lightning on his tongue. It was life. It was fire. It was a power so immense it shattered the poison in his veins and ignited something ancient and terrifying within him. The bond, corrupted and forced, snapped into place. The pain was excruciating, 1,000 bones breaking at once. But the power was divine. He felt his body contort, his muscles swelling, his form twisting not into a wolf but into something more, something forbidden.
The bite was a sharp, searing pain that made her cry out, but it was immediately followed by a wave of intoxicating heat that flooded every part of her being. She didn't feel weakened. She felt connected. A psychic link, a conduit of raw emotion and power, slammed into place between her and Kalen. She could feel him, all of him. His agony was her agony. His rage was her rage, and his surging, terrifying power felt like her own. She watched, her heart not pounding with fear, but with a strange, profound sense of calm as he transformed. He was no longer a wolf. He was a nightmare given form. A hulking beast of shadow and fury, twice the size of his wolf form, with claws like obsidian daggers and eyes that burned with the crimson light of a dying star. The rogues' laughter died in their throats, replaced by gasps of pure terror. They saw a monster, but through the bond, through the searing connection of their shared blood, Sereia saw only him. She saw the protector. She saw the heart of the man The beast let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth and turned on the rogue army. It was no longer a battle. It was a reaping. He moved through their ranks like a god of death, a whirlwind of shadow and claws that left only broken bodies in its wake. The rogues who had been victorious moments before, who had brought the great Alpha to his knees, now broke. They screamed. They ran. But there was no escape from the living embodiment of a pack's vengeance. Chapter 19. A Tracker's Mark. She stood amidst the chaos, a strange island of calm in a sea of terror. Through the bond, she was a passenger inside the beast, feeling the savage joy of its power, the righteous fury of its retribution. Kalen, this monstrous, beautiful version of him, was unstoppable. He was turning the tide, saving his pack, saving her. But Malik, the rogue leader, was not like the others. He was a survivor. He was cunning. As the beast tore through his remaining warriors, Malik reached into a pouch at his belt. He threw a fine gray powder into the air. It wasn't an attack. It was an escape. Where the powder touched him, he simply vanished. One moment he was there, a solid, snarling figure. The next he was gone. An invisibility spell, a cloaking charm. Sereia didn't know what it was, but she felt Kalen's confusion and rage spike through the bond. The beast roared in frustration, its crimson eyes scanning the battlefield, but its senses, overwhelmed by bloodlust, could no longer find its prey. It was a storm without a target, a powerful but now mindless force, lashing out at shadows. The tide of the battle, so decisively turned, was now stalled. He can't see him. He can't smell him, she realized. The beast's rage was a red haze, clouding its instincts. If Malik got close enough, he could still land a killing blow. Sereia knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was up to her. He had saved her with his strength. Now she had to save him with her skill. Her hand, moving with a familiar, practiced instinct, went to the small leather pouch that still hung at her hip. It was her old life, her tracker's kit, a relic from a world she no longer belonged to. Her fingers closed around a small silk bag inside. Ghost pollen, a tracker's last resort. A rare, phosphorescent powder ground from a mountain flower that bloomed only under the full moon. It was incredibly light, designed to cling to anything it touched, and it carried a sharp, acrid scent that no animal could ignore. She had used it once to track a wounded cougar at night. Now she would use it to track a monster. She watched the battlefield, not with her eyes, but with her tracker's senses. She ignored the chaos and looked for the unnatural disturbances. A swirl of dust where no wind blew, a blade of grass pressed down by an unseen foot, a shimmer in the air. There. She saw the faint outline of Malik, creeping toward the beast's unprotected flank, his silver blade raised for a final, treacherous strike. With a silent prayer, Sereia ripped the bag open and threw its contents with all her might. The powder exploded in a cloud of shimmering, ethereal dust, and where it fell, it clung. Suddenly, the invisible rogue was revealed, a glowing, ghostly silhouette against the darkness, a perfect, unmissable target.
Chapter 20. The Fall of the Rogue Rage. Red. Pain. The world was a churning vortex of primal fury. His enemy was gone, vanished into a frustrating, cowardly mist. The beast within him roared, a mindless storm seeking a target. He could feel his mate, a steady, calming presence in the back of his mind, a lighthouse in the hurricane of his rage. But he couldn't think. He could only feel. He could only hate. He needed to destroy. Then a new scent cut through the battlefield's stench of blood and fear. Acrid, sharp, a scent that was not of this world yet was unmistakably a mark, a tracker's mark. At the same moment, a shimmering, ghostly shape appeared out of thin air, a glowing man where before there was nothing. Malik. Revealed. The beast's crimson gaze locked onto the glowing silhouette. All the rage, all the pain, all the corrupted, borrowed power inside him now had a single, burning focus. The hunt was on. There was no strategy now. No cunning. Only a final, brutal reckoning. Malik, his trick revealed, tried to fight back, his silver blade a useless toothpick against the storm. The beast descended upon him. There was no escape from a predator that could see you, smell you, and feel your cowardly heart beating in your chest. The fight was over in a matter of seconds. A crushing blow sent Malik stumbling. Claws like obsidian razors tore through his defenses. He looked up, his eyes wide with the shock of his own mortality, just as the beast's jaws closed in a final, definitive act of savage justice. A guttural roar of victory echoed across the blood-soaked ground. It was over. The threat was eliminated. The red haze of rage began to recede, leaving a hollow, aching void in its place. The immense power that had filled him now drained away, a catastrophic tide leaving only agony and exhaustion behind. Through the beast's eyes he saw the battlefield. He saw the bodies of his enemies. He saw the terrified, awestruck faces of his own pack. And he saw her, Sereia, standing pale but unbroken, her eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering strength that called to the last dregs of the man within the monster. He took a single, shuddering step toward her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The step faltered. The forbidden power had a price, and it was now coming due. His monstrous form convulsed, the bones beginning to snap and break in a painful, chaotic reversal. The strength left him in a sudden, sickening rush. His vision tunneled. The last thing he saw before the world went black was her face as she started to run toward him.
Chapter 21. The Weight of a Soul. He fell. The beast, the monster, the god of death who had saved them all, simply collapsed. A shudder went through the colossal form, and it fell like a felled oak, the ground trembling with the impact. Sereia didn't hesitate. She ran. The battlefield was a blur of motion around her, pack warriors securing the surviving rogues, the wounded being tended to. But she saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to a single point, the unmoving mass of shadow and fur lying in the center of the carnage. As she reached him, the terrifying transformation began to reverse. It was not a clean shift this time. It was a violent, chaotic collapse. The monstrous form convulsed, shadowy energy bleeding from it like smoke. Bones snapped and cracked, the sound sickening in the sudden quiet, as the beast's impossible anatomy was forced back into the shape of a man. By the time she fell to her knees at his side, he was Kaelin once more, naked, covered in blood and dirt, and utterly, terrifyingly still. He was so pale, his skin almost translucent in the moonlight. He wasn't breathing. For one heart-stopping second, she thought she was too late, that the price for his power was his life. No! The word was a choked, desperate whisper. She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. She found it, a faint, thready beat, as fragile as a bird's wing. He was alive, but he was fading. She looked up, her eyes pleading, searching for help. The pack warriors were staring, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and a deep, instinctual fear. They were afraid of the power he had unleashed. They were afraid of the human woman who had somehow been its catalyst. No one moved. No one came to help their fallen alpha. They were all frozen, watching. In that moment, she understood. They didn't know what to do. They were waiting for an order, but their alpha was unconscious. A chilling realization washed over her. It was up to her. "Help me!" she cried out, her voice raw. No one moved. They just stared. Fine. A fierce, protective rage she had never known she possessed surged through her. If they wouldn't help him, she would. She was not a damsel. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. She hooked her arms under his, planting her feet in the blood-soaked earth. He was a dead weight, a mountain of solid, unmoving muscle. Her first attempt was useless. She could barely budge him. Tears of frustration and desperation stung her eyes. "Get up, you stubborn beast," she grunted, her voice cracking. "Get up!" She channeled every ounce of her fear, her anger, her grief, her newfound love into one more attempt. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned. She pulled, dragging him inch by agonizing inch, away from the battlefield and toward the distant, welcoming lights of the lodge. She was no longer the one being carried. She was the one doing the saving. Chapter 22. The Alpha's Gaze. She had managed to drag him to the main lodge, to his chambers, collapsing with exhaustion the moment they were inside. For hours, she worked, a quiet, focused intensity driving her. She cleaned his wounds, the new ones and the old. She washed the blood and grime from his skin. She covered him with a heavy fur blanket. All the while, she felt their presence. The pack, the elders, his beta Rorik, even the scarred warrior gunner. They stood in the hallway, just outside the open door, watching her. Their silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was no longer the open hostility from before. That had been burned away in the battle. This was something new, a wary, uncertain respect. They had seen her offer her blood. They had seen the forbidden power it had unlocked in their alpha. They had seen her mark the invisible enemy. She was no longer just a human stray. She was something else. Something powerful and terrifying they didn't have a name for. She was the daughter of traitors, an outsider who had somehow become the key to their survival. She could feel their mistrust warring with a grudging gratitude. Her place here was balanced on the edge of a knife. She was dipping a cloth in a bowl of water when his eyes opened. Golden eyes, no longer burning with rage or clouded with pain, but clear and startlingly aware. He looked at her, and for a moment, there was a raw, unguarded vulnerability in his gaze. A silent thank you. Then, his senses returned, and he felt the presence of the others. His gaze shifted past her, to the doorway where the pack leaders stood.
He woke to two sensations, a deep, bone-grinding pain, and the gentle, soothing touch of her hand on his forehead. Her scent was the first thing that registered, a calming balm on his shattered senses. He was weak, weaker than he had ever been in his life. But he was alive, and she was safe. That was all that mattered. Then he felt it, the tension in the air, the weight of his pack's collective gaze. He saw his beta, Rorik, and the elders standing in the doorway, their faces grim and questioning. He knew what they were thinking. He knew the questions they were afraid to ask. About the beast form, about the human, about the tainted blood she carried, and the impossible power she had given him. He felt her tense beside him, feeling their judgment not on him, but on her. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He didn't have the strength to stand. He didn't have the voice to issue a command. But he was still their alpha. Slowly, with an effort that cost him dearly, he pushed himself into a sitting position, leaning heavily on Sereia for support. He met Rorik's gaze first, then the elders. Then he found Gunnar in the back, his arms crossed, his face a storm of conflict. Kalen held his gaze. He didn't need to speak. His eyes, burning with the last embers of his alpha fire, said everything. The look was a silent, unshakable command. A look of absolute possession. A look that tolerated no questions, no debate, no doubt. She is mine, the look said. She is the one who saved us. The matter is closed. Forever. One by one, the pack warriors, the elders, even Gunnar, lowered their heads in a sign of silent, absolute deference. The challenge was over. Her place was sealed.
Chapter 23. The Language of the Moon. A fragile peace had settled over the valley in the nights that followed. The pack was healing, the compound was being rebuilt, and the weight of the pack's gaze on her had changed from suspicion to a wary acceptance. She was the alpha's mate, the woman who had saved him. But for Sereia, one question remained. A quiet, insistent whisper in the back of her mind. The question that had started it all. She found him on the moonlit cliff, the alpha's overlook, the place where he had first shown her the man behind the beast. He was staring out at their domain, the night wind ruffling his dark hair. He was no longer the broken man from the battlefield, but the powerful alpha, his strength returning with each passing day. She walked to his side, their shoulders brushing, a comfortable silence settling between them. The howling of the pack rose from the valley below, a song of healing and of peace. "Kalen," she began, her voice soft. "I have to know." He turned to her, his golden eyes soft in the moonlight. He knew what she was going to ask. He had been waiting for it. "That first day," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "in the woods when I fired the flare. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know anything about me. But you saved me from the rogues at my cabin. Why? After everything your pack went through. Why
He looked
did
at
you
her,
save me?"
at the woman who had faced down his enemies, who had offered him her very lifeblood, who had dragged his soul back from the brink. The answer was so simple, and yet so complicated. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tracing the pale, crescent-shaped mark on her wrist. The skin tingled at his touch. "My wolf knew you before I did," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "The moment you crossed into my territory, he scented you. He knew." He finally met her questioning gaze, his own filled with a truth he had fought for so long. "You are my fated mate, Sereia." He told her everything then. He told her how he had resisted it, how he had seen her as a weakness, a distraction sent by a cruel goddess to punish him for his brother's death. He had come to her cabin that night not to save her, but to force her to leave, to excise her from his life before the bond could take root. "I thought you were my damnation," he confessed, his voice thick with the memory of his own foolishness. He stepped closer, closing the small space between them until his forehead rested against hers. The world fell away, leaving only the two of them, bathed in the light of the moon. "I was so wrong," he whispered. "You were never my damnation. You were my salvation." She closed her eyes, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. They were not captor and captive, they were not alpha and human. They were two halves of a single soul, a bond forged in blood and fire and sacrifice. They stood together in the quiet of the night, their shared breath misting in the cool air, a new, peaceful equilibrium settling over them. Then, from far beyond the borders of their valley, a new sound drifted on the wind. A distant, unfamiliar howl, wild, powerful, and utterly alone. It wasn't a threat, not yet. It was a question, a challenge from a world beyond their own. They looked at each other, and in their shared gaze, there was no fear, only a silent, steadfast promise. This story was over. But their journey had just begun.